here's where we usually talk about, the gear and the tone. And Ritchie's gear changed over the years a little bit. He started out, you saw it in some of the clips. He was playing an ES-335 when he was in his studio session days. It was his first good guitar. He originally was playing with Vox AC-30s, and then he moved on to the Marshalls. And
by the way, if you want to know more about this, listen to episode 31, where we talk for more than 3 hours about this sort of stuff.
Right. And there's also, if you want to know about Ritchie particularly, go to the Alchemy page in dinosaurrockguitar.com. There's a link on the page to a website that has done the most exhaustive rundown of gear that Ritchie used that I've ever seen. It's absolutely incredibly detailed in a level that, even I'm not, I know the general things that he used and all of that. But this guy who's put together this website, that you can get the link from my site. If you want to know the gory details of like what pickups he was using in which guitars in 1974 or 1978 or whatever, he's got all of that information laid out there for you. And it's very interesting stuff. But I think he started playing Strats.
It's treblebooster.net, I see.
Is that what it is?
Yeah. That's the main page on which he's on.
Yeah, he's a guy I think who is building replica treble boosters, but I was also a huge Blackmore fan. So
cool.
He put that together, and it's still up. And I think Ritchie says the first Strat he got was one that Eric Clapton gave him.
Wow.
And I guess it was something that wasn't particularly a really good one or anything like that. But I think Ritchie was interested in starting to use the Strat from seeing Hendrix. It would be disingenuous to say that Ritchie didn't get anything from Jimi Hendrix. He did. I think he got the idea that the Strat could make all of these sounds and had the whammy bar, and you could be bombastic with it and make, those kinds of dive bomb noises and all of those kinds of things. And also, I think what he also got from Hendrix was the performance aspect of what he could be live on stage and how he could be flamboyant and reckless on stage the way Hendrix often was. And you saw, in the clip of him like pushing the guitar across the stage floor and things like that,
stomping on it.
Yeah, those kinds of things. To be honest, also he was a huge Who fan. You wouldn't know it, but from his music. But Ritchie Blackmore is a humongous Who fan and very fond of what Townsend was doing back in the day, and it's completely different from what Ritchie's ever done. Ritchie's never done that kind of quick pop music kind of thing the way the Who did, but he was a big fan of them. And he's also been a big fan of Jeff Beck in his career, and has stated on occasion that when Jeff is on, there's nobody better. But Jeff Beck's another guy who isn't on every night. So you have that kind of thing. But anyway, he got the Strat apparently from Clapton, and he almost never looked back. He pretty much from the time he got the Strat, he stuck with it. The only place that it really comes up of any note, the 335 that is on Child in Time. Okay. He plays the 335 on Child in Time, and you can hear that it's a humbucker Gibson sound in the solo of that song.
It's a different kind of sound, yeah.
Yeah, it's the same guitar he was playing in that clip where he ended with Jingle Bells. That's the guitar that I'm talking about. But for the most part, after that was in 70, I believe, 1970, he's pretty much straight up Strat for the rest of his career. And he had several of them that he played throughout those times. And that website will show you the evolution of what he did with each one. For the longest period of time, he had one that was associated with, which was a white 74 Rosewood neck Strat that became his main guitar that was, he used longer than any other. It started, I believe, I think he got that guitar during the Graham Bonnet years of Rainbow, but you don't really see it until like the Joe Lynn Turner era. And it's the guitar that you see when he's doing that blues jam, and the one where he's playing some improvisorial stuff that we're going to show you in a clip. It was an old Olympic white that faded into this banana cream color, and it had a scalloped fingerboard, which means there's scoops of wood taken out between the frets so that he can get his fingers under the strings a little easier. And that became a thing that, again, he was probably the first one to do that. He did it himself. And then it became a thing where like Yngwie Strats have scalloped fingerboards now, and other particularly neoclassical guys use scalloped fingerboards.
What's the main advantage of that?
You can get your finger under the string a little bit, and when it's not a speed thing, it's a control thing. It's for like, bends and vibratos. So you can press further into the fingerboard and get more meat of your fingertip into the string.
Right. Okay.
And it gives you a little bit more. I don't play them. I've never tried them really, but I understand what they're about, and you have to have a very light touch. For example, when you're playing chords and stuff, because, you can press the string down so far between the frets that you can bend it out of tune if you press it too hard.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Where the fingerboard's normally going to stop you from pressing very far.
You actually pull on them by pressing down.
Yeah. I mean, imagine the space under the fingerboard of a normal guitar. You have, if you're fretting the note,
Yeah.
Imagine being able to press another quarter of an inch down. You could bend the guitar note out of tune easily so you develop a lighter touch. So you play those guitars, it changes the way you play a little bit.
Okay.
But it's very commonplace now, and you see it in guys like Yngwie and James Bird and Joe Stump and guys who play in that neoclassical shredder style. Most of them are using that. But again, I don't think anybody was doing it really before Ritchie. And he had that guitar like that, and he sent it off for a refret. And the idiot he sent it to, instead of just putting in new frets, he planed the neck completely flat. And he thought he was doing something cool, but basically he ruined the guitar. And Ritchie went berserk because, you send a guitar off for work. The guys, this is like basic stuff. Do the work you're hired to do. Don't do anything more to a guitar unless someone, you call and you ask the guy, hey, I found this problem with your guitar. Do you want me to fix it?
Right.
If not, just do what you were contracted to do. He was supposed to put in new frets, and this guy didn't realize that these scalloped spaces between the fingerboards, he thought it was wear. He thought it was wear and tear. So he thought he was doing a good thing by completely planing it flat. And when the guitar came back, it was ruined. And it had been Ritchie's main guitar for a long time.
What did he do? Did he...
He basically had to pick one of his other Strats, and he's been using that one ever since. So okay. A similar one, but it's a sad ending to a guitar that was a really cool #1 guitar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On a lot of legendary recordings.
Right. And live performances too.
What happened to it? Like, did he just get rid of it?
He still has it. He still has it. I mean, but I don't think he ever wanted to sort of put on a new fingerboard and go through the whole process of doing it again. But
I was kind of hoping there was a story that he beat the guy with it or something. But
yeah, I mean, yeah. I've had friends who've had the same kind of thing happen, where it's like you take a guitar for service and they do something that you never asked them to do that you didn't want.
Yeah.
And it's ridiculous. No one should do that. Anyway, on the amplifier side, that's another interesting story. He's a guy who's mostly associated with Marshalls, but he claims he never really loved the Marshall sound. There was a time early on, he was using the AC30s, the Vox AC30s. And then, he went to the Marshalls. And for example, on the Cal Jam stage, all those Marshalls he blew up were fake Marshalls. They were just like empty cabinets and heads. He didn't destroy real gear. This is very common back in the day. They'd have the backdrop of all of these Marshall stacks on stage. And some people used real ones and some people just used, the facade basically of having them on stage. But he did use Marshalls, and he developed, he was originally using these modified 200-watt Marshall majors. Now,
which is already insanely loud,
yeah,
right?
right. So you have, in those days, you had a 50-watt Marshall and you had a 100-watt Marshall, and the 100-watt Marshall was only maybe 10% louder than the 50-watt Marshall. So he started using these 200-watt Marshalls, and then he had them modded so that they would output 280 watts. And Jim Marshall would tell the story that when Ritchie showed up at the factory, everybody would leave the building because they knew he was going to be testing his amps, and it would just be deafening. And he had these 280-watt Marshalls, and you can see pictures of this too in live photos and in live pictures. He knew he was smart enough to not stand in front of them for any length of time. He actually joked about, I point them at the singer.
Just to mess with him.
Just to be a dick, yeah. And but I did have the opportunity to see him live with Rainbow in Joe Lynn Turner's era, where he was using three of these two. It was like that tour, that Live Between the Eyes tour, 1984, something like that. And it had to be 83 because 84 they're back together with Purple. I think he was using them in Purple too. But I remember the first time I saw Ritchie live was during the Joe Lynn Turner era of Rainbow, and it was the Live Between the Eyes tour. And he had three of these Marshall stacks on stage with three of these 280-watt amps. I don't know if they were all on at the same time. I think it may have just been one, and the others were backups in case they would blow up or something. But my God, he was loud. Oh my God, he was loud. It was just unbelievably loud, and it sounded great, but it was really, really damn loud. And after that, he moved on to in more recent years, after he stopped doing a lot of, maybe it was during the last tours of Rainbow in the mid 90s.
Where did you see him? Where was his concert? Was it?
I think it was either the Worcester Center, Worcester Civic Center. No, where the hell is it? In Worcester, Massachusetts? I can't remember what the building was called, the main building in Worcester, or the Providence Civic Center in Providence, Rhode Island. I was living in Boston at the time, and that was a typical place for bands passing through New England would go in those venues. And so it was a hockey rink sized building, but it was damn loud, and it was great though.
I can imagine. That's if I had a time machine, that's the first stuff I'd do, man. See all these guys in their prime.
Yeah. Anyway, he worked with the German amp company called Engel, ENGL, in the early 90s and developed what was a signature amp called I think it's a 100-watt Engel head called the Ritchie Blackmore Signature amp or something like that. I think Vivian Campbell is using one now in the Last in Line shows where he's playing the old Dio songs.
Is that the E650?
It's actually got his name on it.
Ritchie Blackmore E650, I think.
Must be.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for what it's worth, I think he was using some Engel combos when he was doing whatever electric work he would do with Blackmore's Night. He would use like Engel combos. So he became sort of an Engel spokesperson for a while. I don't know what he's using now. I don't think he's using much now in the way of electric anyway. But to me, it didn't make a whole hell of a lot of difference that he was using those amps.
Yeah, what were his so these Marshall Major? I guess is that like an evolution of the Plexi Marshalls, or?
I think I think it's a different circuit.
Okay.
I'm not really. Not a lot of people use those.
Yeah, I haven't. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I don't know exactly, what's going on in those heads, but it's got to be different circuitry and stuff, a different design than what was in the normal 50 and 100. They had different face plates on them. Some of them had, only a few knobs on them. I don't know which ones he was using exactly, but it was
There's
still very Marshall-y
they
in
made
terms of its.
they only made 1,200 of them, so
Yeah.
I guess they were used by rock musicians who needed a very high volume. A notable user is Ritchie Blackmore.
Right. Right. Probably the most notable user of those amps. The other thing he did, which
Joe Perry used them too.
the other thing Ritchie did, which was a large part of his sound for a lot of the years in the 70s, was he had an Iowa tape machine on stage that he would use as a sort of a preamp to get a little bit of preamp gain, and he would also use it as an echo unit.
Okay.
The way a lot of players would use an Echoplex. And if you go back and you look at the clips of where he's on stage with Rainbow in the Dio years, you'll see this thing off to the side, this little reel-to-reel tape recorder that's sitting on the side of the stage. And, that was part of his sound too. He wasn't always going straight into the amp. But as I said, there wasn't a lot of extra gain stage in those days. And he's not known for using any pedals or anything like that. So it wasn't like he was kicking on a boost pedal for his leads and stuff. So in those days, people would do what they had to do. And he found out he could run through this tape deck and get some extra oomph into his amp.
Wow.
And I think he was also using the tape deck perhaps as the echo unit for when you hear things like the live introduction to Mistreated and things like that, which has a lot of echo on it.
And this also makes me realize that those guys just had to figure things out. There weren't effects, there weren't computers or anything.
Absolutely. Tony Iommi was the real king of that. I mean, it's a bit of a tangent, but I mean, a lot of the things that Tony Iommi pioneered, he was like the first guy who did 24 fret guitar. He was the first guy who had like ultralight strings made because of his fingertips and all of that. There was, a lot of innovating going on because people were trying to get what they needed to have to make this music in a way that they wanted it, to sound. So, we have a zillion options for everything these days. I mean, almost anything you want, you can buy a pedal for it or something like that.
Yeah, like that amp we talked about in one of the previous ones.
Yeah, yeah. All of this, the Spark.
Yeah, the Spark, yeah.
All of these things that are available now that, these guys didn't have. I mean, just things like having a boost pedal for your solos. That was, that starts coming along, with fuzz in the late 60s, and it doesn't really become boost and overdrive until the 70s. So, those kinds of things, that's why you see people using treble boosters and things like that. And using this tape recorder as another gain stage effectively, or a bit of a preamp boost, was one of the things he did that was unique to him. So all of that aside, I mean, when you think of Ritchie, his tone is really a hard rock Strat tone. And even though there was a ton of volume and wattage involved, there's not a lot of gain. You can hear, on all of these clips that it's nothing like the gain we use these days.
No.
And it's just imminently cleaner. And it's like thinner sounding than Gary Moore's Strat sound in the 80s. It's closer to like Jeff Beck's Strat tone, but it's still cleaner and thinner. It's not, Blackmore doesn't have a fat sound, as it were. It doesn't have that big, thick, mid-rangey sound. It's more of a biting sound.
Right.
It's got this clean, and it's more treble and more pronounced. It's not as warm even as Yngwie's sound. It's much cleaner and brighter, I think.
You got to listen to it loud to appreciate it, I think.
Yeah, and again, we think of as players of when you're playing fast things and hammer-ons and pull-offs and stuff, you want that gain so that everything's smooth and that you get that compression where, if you're playing a lot of quick runs and things, it sounds smooth and even.
Yeah.
And you could hear on like on the clips from the Cal Jam when we are talking about the chops, where you stand in front of Cal Jam, you could hear that's not there on those clips. His notes die out if he doesn't hit them right.
Right.
You know,
And he almost hits all of them. He doesn't. He does a lot of what do you call it? Like alternative picking. Like he picks almost every note.
Yeah, I mean, and there's plenty of hammer-ons and pull-offs and stuff, but back in those days, it was harder to make those things sound smooth and even.
Yeah.
Because you didn't have that excess gain that was so forgiving. There were the gear was more unforgiving in those days. Is I guess the best way to put it. If you start with a clean sound on a guitar and you just start trilling a note, la 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 la, like that,
yeah,
and you want it to run into the next one and the next one and the next one, the more you turn up the gain, the easier that gets.
Yes.
Now imagine trying to do that with low gain, and it just makes it a harder exercise, and it makes it harder to sound smooth and even, and that was the nature of the gear back in those days.
And that only showcases how good he actually was, I think, too.
Mm-hmm. Right. So the other thing we were going to talk about, and we've talked a little bit about this, was the other aspects of his guitar style. We talked about that he doesn't play traditional rhythms. You don't usually see him play a root 6 bar chord. He'll play what's called a root 1 bar chord, where you don't bar the whole neck of the guitar at the root note. You only bar the top 2 strings, the E and the B. It's the same chord, but he'll play it without the low end chunk. Whereas, a guy like Iommi will always play it the other way to get the low strings involved. Ritchie's lead style is very staccato, and it's perhaps the most distinctive and recognizable element of his playing. Every note is distinct and separate from the others. They don't run into each other like in a legato style. It's like the polar opposite of Joe Satriani.